9 minutes ago. Visibility is 3/4, light snow, indefinite ceiling 1,200, and altimeter. Legion's on tower 120.7. Was that?
It clung to us like nothing was there. Those 8 words spoken by an Allegiant Airlines pilot on the evening of January 25th, 2026, described a weather phenomenon that was about to kill 6 people. 8 words that perfectly captured the danger that was falling from the sky over Bangor, Maine. 8 words that should have stopped every aircraft on that airport from attempting to take off. But those 8 words were never heard by the crew that needed to hear them most. Because 4 minutes after that warning was given, a Bombardier Challenger 650 business jet attempted to take off in the exact same conditions that the Allegiant pilot had just described. And 45 seconds into their takeoff roll, that Challenger flipped upside down on the runway, burst into flames, and killed all 6 people on board. Today we need to talk about the gap between what the weather was reported to be and what it actually was. Because the official weather report that night said light snow. But it wasn't light snow, it was ice pellets, and we have proof. Audio proof from a Ring doorbell camera that captured not just the moment of the crash, but the sound of what was actually falling from the sky. And when you hear that sound, when you understand what that Allegiant pilot was trying to communicate, you're going to realize that this accident happened because 6 people flew into conditions that had already been identified as deadly, but that information never reached them in time. Let's start with what the tower was telling pilots about the weather that evening. This is critical because pilots base their operational decisions on the information they receive from official sources. Air traffic controllers provide weather updates throughout the day based on automated weather observation systems and official forecasts. On the evening of January 25th at Bangor International Airport, the weather briefing that was being provided to departing aircraft went like this. Visibility 3/4 of a mile, light snow, indefinite ceiling 1,200 feet, temperature -1 degree Celsius, altimeter 3039er, runway visual range more than 6,000 feet. Now let's break that down because each piece of information tells pilots something about what they're going to encounter. Visibility 3/4 of a mile is low, but it's legal for takeoff. Light snow is exactly what it sounds like. Snow falling at a rate that's visible but not heavy. Indefinite ceiling 1,200 means there are clouds, but they're broken, not solid. The temperature at -1 Celsius is cold, but not extreme by Maine winter standards. And runway visual range more than 6,000 feet means you can see far enough down the runway to safely take off. If you're a pilot listening to that weather report, what does it tell you? It tells you conditions are marginal but manageable. It's not good weather. It's not a nice day. But it's well within the operational limits of a business jet. It's the kind of weather that experienced pilots deal with regularly in the northern United States during winter. Light snow. That's the key phrase, light snow. That phrase creates an expectation in a pilot's mind. Light snow is something you can work with. Light snow means you get de-iced, you monitor your holdover time, you conduct your contamination checks, and if everything looks good, you take off. Light snow is not a showstopper. It's a challenge, but it's a manageable challenge. But here's the problem. What was falling from the sky over Bangor that evening wasn't light snow. It was ice pellets. And the difference between light snow and ice pellets is the difference between a challenging departure and a fatal one. Snow is frozen water vapor that forms crystals as it falls. Snowflakes are delicate structures that land on surfaces and can be blown away by wind or brushed off by hand. Snow accumulates gradually. It's visible. It's something pilots can see and assess. Ice pellets are completely different. Ice pellets are frozen raindrops. They're small, hard, spherical pieces of ice that fall like hail but smaller. When ice pellets hit a surface, especially a cold metal surface like an aircraft wing, they don't bounce off. They don't blow away. They stick instantly. And they stick with a tenacity that defeats de-icing fluid. Type 4 de-icing fluid, the gel that's designed to prevent contamination from adhering to wings during the takeoff roll, is formulated to handle snow. It's formulated to handle light icing, but it's not formulated to handle a heavy concentration of ice pellets. Ice pellets penetrate the fluid layer and bond directly to the metal surface underneath. And once they're there, you have a contaminated wing. The Allegiant Airlines crew discovered this the hard way. They had been de-iced. They had taxied out to runway 33. G'day, they had been cleared by the tower to take their position and prepare for departure. And then something happened as they approached the end of the runway as they were conducting their final checks before beginning their takeoff roll. They experienced something that made them stop. They conducted what's called a pre-contamination check. This is a critical step in winter operations after you've been de-iced before you actually take off. You verify that your wings are still clean. Sometimes this is done by a pilot going back into the cabin and looking out the window at the wings. Sometimes it's done by feel, by actually touching the wing surface if you can access it. The whole point is to make sure that between the time you were de-iced and the time you're taking off, nothing has accumulated on your wings that would affect lift. The Allegiant crew conducted this check, and they failed it. They had contamination on their wings, despite having been freshly de-iced, despite having Type 4 fluid protecting their surfaces. They had ice adhering to their wings, and they made the only decision you can make in that situation. They refused to take off. They rejected the departure and taxied back to the ramp. Now the crew of a Breeze Airways aircraft using the call sign Moxie had been watching this sequence of events. They saw Allegiant taxi out, they saw Allegiant take position on the runway, and they saw Allegiant come back without taking off. That's unusual. That's the kind of thing that makes other pilots sit up and pay attention because it means something went wrong. The Breeze crew wanted to know what had happened. So they asked the tower if they could switch to a different frequency to talk to the Allegiant crew directly. The tower approved. Both aircraft switched to an air-to-air frequency. And then the Breeze crew asked the question, did you guys fail the pre-contamination checks? And what the Allegiant pilot said next should have been broadcast to every aircraft on that airport, should have been transmitted on the tower frequency where everyone could hear it, should have become part of the official weather information being disseminated to pilots, but it wasn't. It was set on a private frequency between two crews. And this is what the Allegiant pilot said. Yeah, so I don't know what blew over at the end of the runway, but the visibility drops and it stuck to us like there was nothing there. Let me repeat that. And it stuck to us like there was nothing there. Think about what that means. The Allegiant aircraft had been de-iced. They had Type 4 fluid on their wings. Type 4 fluid is specifically designed to prevent ice and snow from sticking. It's a protective barrier. It's supposed to keep your wings clean during the taxi and takeoff roll. But the Allegiant pilot is saying that whatever fell on them stuck to their aircraft as if that protective barrier didn't exist, as if they had never been de-iced at all, as if they had bare metal wings with no protection whatsoever. That's not light snow. Light snow doesn't do that. Light snow lands on Type 4 fluid and sits on top of it, and when you accelerate for takeoff, the airflow blows it away. It's what the Allegiant pilot is describing as something that penetrated the fluid and bonded to the wing surface. That's ice pellets. The Allegiant pilot also said something else that's critical. I don't know what blew over at the end of the runway. He's describing a localized phenomenon, something that happened at a specific location, not continuous precipitation covering the entire airport, but something concentrated, something intense, a burst of ice pellets that hit them as they reached the end of the runway. Weather is not uniform. Even within a small area like an airport, you can have pockets of heavier precipitation, areas where conditions are worse than the general forecast indicates. The Allegiant crew encountered one of those pockets, and it contaminated their wings so severely that they refused to take off. And here's the thing. Yeah, the Allegiant crew made absolutely the right decision. They had contamination on their wings. Taking off with contaminated wings on any aircraft is dangerous. Taking off with contaminated wings on a Bombardier Challenger is suicidal because the Challenger 600 series has a documented, proven, deadly sensitivity to wing contamination. Let me take you back 22 years. November 28th, 2004. Montrose, Colorado. A Bombardier Challenger is preparing to depart in light snow and mist. Temperature is -1 Celsius. Visibility is 1.4 miles. There are clouds at 500 feet. Sound familiar? It should. Those conditions are almost identical to what existed in Bangor on January 25th, 2026. The Challenger in Montrose had not been de-iced. The crew did a visual inspection of the wings and didn't see any significant contamination, just a trace amount of frost or ice, not enough to worry about in their judgment. They took off. During the rotation, as the nose came up and the aircraft began to lift off the runway, one wing stalled. The aircraft rolled, it crashed. 3 people died, including the son of NBC executive Dick Ebersol. The NTSB investigated and determined that there was imperceptible ice contamination on the wings, contamination that was too small to see with the naked eye but enough to disrupt the airflow and cause an asymmetric stall. The NTSB determined that Bombardier had not adequately warned operators about how sensitive the Challenger's wing design is to even trace amounts of contamination. 2 years earlier, in January 2002, such a Challenger crashed in Birmingham, England under similar circumstances. Takeoff in winter weather, wing contamination, aircraft rolled, fatal crash. British investigators reached similar conclusions. The Challenger's swept wing design makes it extremely susceptible to ice contamination. Even amounts that seem insignificant can cause catastrophic loss of control. After these crashes, the FAA took action. They issued new rules clarifying that any frost, ice, or snow on wings must be removed before flight. They updated de-icing standards, and in 2008, they issued a specific directive requiring Bombardier to add a warning to the Challenger 600 flight manual, stating explicitly that ice, frost, or slush on wings can cause loss of control during takeoff. All of that happened. All of those warnings were issued. All of that regulatory action was taken. And yet here we are in 2026, and another Challenger has crashed during takeoff in winter weather due to wing contamination. Now let's get back to BANGOR. The Allegiant crew has refused to take off. They've communicated to the Breeze crew what they experienced, but that information never makes it to the tower frequency. The official weather report being broadcast to all aircraft still says light snow. Nothing has changed in the information environment. And approximately 4 minutes after the Allegiant conversation with Breeze, a Bombardier Challenger 650 registered November 10 Kilo Juliet receives clearance for takeoff. November 10 Kilo Juliet, Bangor Tower, runway 33, RVR more than 6,000. Wind 060 at Niner, cleared for takeoff. Yeah, the pilot acknowledges. Cleared for takeoff, runway 33, Kilo Juliet. The engines spool up. The aircraft begins to accelerate. And somewhere during that takeoff roll, the same thing that happened to Allegiant happens to the Challenger. They encounter that pocket of ice pellets. It hits their wings. It penetrates their de-icing fluid. It contaminates their wing surfaces. But unlike Allegiant, the Challenger doesn't stop. They're already committed to the takeoff. They're at high speed. They've reached rotation speed, and the pilot pulls back on the yoke. The nose comes up. The aircraft begins to lift off the runway. And then the physics of contaminated airflow takes over. One wing generates less lift than the other. The aircraft begins to roll at rotation speed at high angle of attack. With asymmetric lift, the roll becomes uncontrollable. Within seconds, the aircraft is inverted. It crashes back onto the runway upside down. 45 seconds after being cleared for takeoff, a transmission comes over the tower frequency. Aircraft upside down. We have a passenger aircraft upside down. All traffic is stopped. Crash trucks arrive within a minute, but there's nothing they can do. The aircraft is engulfed in flames. All 6 people on board are dead. Tara Arnold, 46 years old, attorney, mother of 2 children, dead. Jacob Hosmer, 47 years old, pilot, dead. Shauna Collins, event planner, dead. Nick Mastroscusa, hospitality executive, father of 3, dead. 2 other individuals whose names have not been officially released, dead. 6 people who were supposed to be flying to Paris for a trip. 6 people who had their whole lives ahead of them. Dead because they flew into weather conditions that were not what they were reported to be. Dead because critical safety information existed but never reached them. Dead because the official weather report said light snow when the reality was ice pellets. Now here's the proof. Because you don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to rely on the Allegiant pilot's description. We have audio evidence of exactly what was falling from the sky at the moment of the crash. A resident who lives near Bangor International Airport has a Ring doorbell camera. That camera records audio. And on the evening of January 25th, at the moment the Challenger crashed, that Ring camera was recording. The audio has been released to the media, and it's been analyzed by multiple aviation experts. Let me describe what you hear on that audio. First, you hear a bang in the distance. That's the impact. That's the Challenger hitting the runway. Then you hear a dog barking. The dog heard the explosion and is reacting to it. But if you keep listening, if you pay attention to the background audio throughout the recording, you hear something else. A crackling sound. A hard, persistent pelting sound, not the soft whisper of snow falling, not the gentle sound of snowflakes landing, a sharp crackling like small pieces of ice hitting hard surfaces. That sound is unmistakable if you've ever experienced ice pellets. It's the sound they make when they hit windows, when they hit cars, when they hit pavement. It's a sound that tells you immediately this is not snow. This is frozen precipitation that's hard enough to make noise on impact. Shay, and that's exactly what the Allegiant pilot was describing. That's what stuck to his aircraft, like the de-icing fluid wasn't there. That's what contaminated his wings, and that's what killed 6 people 4 minutes later. The Ring doorbell audio is proof that the official weather report was wrong. The tower was saying light snow, but the reality was ice pellets, and that discrepancy killed 6 people. Here's why this matters so much. Pilots make decisions based on the information they're given. When the tower says light snow, pilots calibrate their risk assessment to light snow conditions. They know they need to be de-iced. They know they need to monitor holdover times. They know they need to do contamination checks, but light snow is within their operational envelope. It's challenging but manageable. If the tower had said ice pellets, if the weather report had accurately described what was falling, pilots would have made different decisions. Some would have delayed, some would have canceled, some would have diverted to airports with better weather, because ice pellets change the risk calculation completely. Ice pellets mean your de-icing protection may not be effective. Ice pellets mean your holdover time is dramatically reduced. Ice pellets mean you're operating at the edge of your aircraft's contamination tolerance. And if you're flying a Challenger, ice pellets mean you're risking your life. The question that's going to dominate the NTSB investigation is why the weather report was wrong. How did the automated weather observation system miss the ice pellets? Was it a sensor limitation? Was it a reporting threshold issue? And was it a human error in interpreting the data? We don't know yet. But what we do know is that there was a fundamental disconnect between what pilots were being told about the weather and what the weather actually was, and that disconnect was deadly. The NTSB is also going to ask why the Allegiant pilot's observation didn't make it into the official information stream. When a professional airline crew refuses to take off because of contamination, that's significant information. That should trigger questions from the tower. That should result in a pilot report being filed. That should result in updated weather information being broadcast to all aircraft. But none of that happened. The Allegiant crew had a conversation with the Breeze crew on a private frequency, and then they went about their business. And the next aircraft in line, the Challenger, had no idea what had just happened. There's another layer to this that's worth examining. The Challenger crew had been on the ground for over an hour and a half. They had plenty of time to assess the weather. They had gone through the de-icing process. They had received a treatment with type 1 and type 4 fluids. They had spent approximately 20 minutes at the de-icing pad, and then they had taxied to the runway. During all of that time, they were presumably monitoring the conditions. They were looking out the window. They were hearing what was hitting their windscreen. They had to have some awareness of what was falling. So why didn't they recognize that it wasn't just light snow? Why didn't they question the weather report? This is where experience and familiarity with winter operations becomes critical. If you've spent years flying in northern climates, if you've operated extensively in places like Maine, Iceland, Norway, you develop an instinctive recognition of what ice pellets sound like and look like. You hear that crackling on your windscreen and alarm bells go off in your head. But if you're from a warmer climate, if your winter operations experience is limited, you might not recognize the significance of that sound. You might trust the official weather report and assume that the crackling you're hearing is just how light snow sounds at -1 Celsius. The Challenger was based in Houston, Texas. The crew may not have had extensive experience with the specific conditions that exist in northern Maine during winter storms. They may have been relying heavily on the official weather reports and on the fact that other aircraft were still operating. They saw planes landing. They presumably knew that Allegiant and Breeze were preparing to depart. The airport was open. All of those factors would have reinforced the idea that conditions were challenging but manageable. What they didn't know was that Allegiant had just refused to take off. What they didn't know was that there were localized pockets of ice pellets that were overwhelming de-icing protection. What they didn't know was that the aircraft 4 minutes ahead of them had encountered conditions that were far worse than the official weather report indicated. They didn't know because that information was never communicated to them. This is the fundamental tragedy of this accident. It's not that the Challenger crew made some egregious error. It's not that they were reckless or incompetent. It's that they operated based on the information they had, and the information they had was incomplete and inaccurate. The tower said light snow. They believed light snow. They prepared for light snow. But what they flew into was ice pellets. And by the time they discovered that, it was too late. They were at rotation speed. One wing stalled, the aircraft rolled, and 6 people died. This accident is going to force some hard questions about how weather information is gathered, reported, and disseminated to pilots. Automated weather observation systems are generally very good, but they have limitations. They can miss localized phenomena. They can't always distinguish between types of precipitation. And they report data at specific intervals, which means conditions can change between reports. The system relies on pilots to supplement the automated data with their own observations. That's what pilot reports are for. When you encounter conditions that are different from what was forecast, you're supposed to report it to ATC so they can pass that information along to other pilots. But the system breaks down when that information is communicated informally between pilots instead of being reported to ATC. And that's exactly what happened here. The Allegiant crew had critical information. They communicated it to the Breeze crew, but they didn't put it into the official system. And 4 minutes later, another crew flew into the same deadly conditions without any warning. The NTSB is going to recommend changes. They may recommend that controllers be required to ask follow-up questions when aircraft reject takeoffs. They may recommend that certain types of pilot observations be required to be reported on tower frequency rather than on private frequencies. They may recommend improvements to weather observation systems to better detect and report ice pellets. All of those changes could help prevent future accidents. But the fundamental lesson here is simpler. When you encounter hazardous conditions, report them, get that information into the system. Don't assume someone else will do it. Don't assume the next guy will figure it out. Make the radio call, file the report, because somewhere behind you, maybe 4 minutes behind you, there's another crew making decisions based on what they know, and what they know might be wrong. And that gap between what they know and what's real could kill them. The Allegiant pilot used 8 words that perfectly described the danger. It stuck to us like there was nothing there. Those 8 words should have saved 6 lives. Those 8 words should have stopped every aircraft on that airport from taking off until conditions were reassessed. Those 8 words contain the truth about what was happening with the weather. But those 8 words were said on the wrong frequency at the wrong time, and 6 people died. This is the lesson of BANGOR. Truth matters, accurate information matters, communication matters. The tower said light snow, but it wasn't snow. It was ice pellets. And we have the audio to prove it. The crackling on that Ring doorbell camera is the sound of people dying because the information they needed never reached them. That crackling is the sound of a system failure. That crackling is the sound of 6 lives that could have been saved if only someone had said on the tower frequency what the Allegiant pilot said on that private frequency. It clung to us like nothing was there. 8 words, 4 minutes, 6 lives. That's the equation of this tragedy, and that's why it matters.